Laws of exponents dividing monomials, lesson 4.3 notes. Example number 2. To solve these problems, we're going to use the order of operations. So PEMDAS, we'll be using the order of operations. Well, for most of these problems in example number 2, the only thing to do is divide. However, E and F require more than just division. I want to talk about PEMDAS for a second, right? The P in PEMDAS represents parentheses, but really what it represents is all grouping symbols. Now, everyone, you don't need to write this down, just follow along. Everyone knows that parentheses is a grouping symbol, okay? And if you saw these, those are called brackets. Those are also grouping symbols. These, not very that wasn't drawn very well. They are called braces, and again, they are grouping symbols. But the one grouping symbol that some people don't talk about is the division bar. The division bar really is a grouping symbol in the sense that you cannot divide until you simplified everything in the numerator and everything in the denominator. In other words, when you see a division bar, it almost automatically puts parentheses around the top and parentheses around the bottom, meaning you have to simplify the top completely, the numerator completely, you have to simplify the denominator completely before you can do any division. So, you cannot divide until there are no parentheses in the numerator nor in the denominator. You cannot divide until there are no parentheses in the numerator nor in the denominator. So please pause your video and write that down. All right, if you look at A, B, C, and D, there are no parentheses in the numerator, there's no parentheses in the denominator, there's nothing I can do to simplify the numerator, there's nothing I can do to simplify the denominator, so I can go right into dividing. So again, the first step I'm going to do in A is divide. Write that down. So I would divide -4/2. I would put that in my calculator if I needed to. If you put -4/2 in your calculator, it comes out to be just -2. Where would you put that -2? Well, think about this. If you had -2 and you wanted to make a fraction, what would you do? You would put it over 1, meaning the -2 belongs in the numerator. So if you put the fraction in your calculator and it gives you an integer answer, that number will go in the numerator. If it's not a fraction, it will go in the numerator. So -2, well, first of all, I'd cross out the 2, cross out the -4, and put -2 in the numerator. Go ahead and put a 1 on your x. Now I'm going to divide my x terms. X to the first is the smaller exponent. Completely cross that out. Now I'm going to take 2 minus 1. 2 minus 1 is 1. So this will become x to the first in the numerator. Y to the third is the term with the smallest exponent. I'm going to take 5 and I'm going to subtract the 3. 5 minus 3. That means the 5 will become a 2. All right, now, there's nothing left in the denominator. There's nothing left down here, which means it would be just a 1. So, I technically have -2 x to the first y squared over 1. But because the denominator is a 1, we don't need 1s when it's in the denominator. So I can write my final answer as -2 x, and I don't need to put the 1 for x to the first, y squared. So the only thing that was left on the bottom was 1 because everything canceled out. I don't need 1 in the denominator. So what was left on the top was -2 x to the first y squared, but I don't need to put the 1 on the exponent. So again, do not need to write the 1 if it is in the denominator. You do not need to write the 1 if it is in the denominator. Go ahead, pause your video and get that written down. Okay, for B, again, I'm going to start by dividing my coefficients. If I put -6 over 2 in my calculator, I get -3. Again, since I get an integer, it means it goes in the numerator. So the -3 would go up here. But I'll put a 1 on my x and a 1 on my y. So the x to the first is the term with the smaller exponent. I completely cross it out. And I take 3 and I subtract 1. 3 minus 1 is 2. Do the same thing for the y. The y to the first has the smaller exponent. It gets completely crossed out. And then I take 4 minus 1. 4 minus 1 is 3. So once again, the only thing left in the denominator is a 1. And I don't need it. I just need to worry about what's in the numerator. So what's left in the numerator is -3 x squared, y to the third, and z to the eighth. All right, C. If you would put -3 over 2, let's put that in the iPad calculator. All right, so I put in -3 over 2, hit enter. Now the iPad calculator is going to give you sorry about that. The iPad calculator is going to give you the decimal answer. So what you want to do then is hit that button beside the equal sign that changes it back. Notice how it's still -3 over 2, which means it doesn't reduce. So for this one, there's nothing to do with the coefficients. I leave them alone. All right, so I'm going to put a 1 on the P and a 1 on the S. Again, the -3 over 2 stays -3 over 2, so I don't touch the coefficients. They are already in simplest form. Well, going in alphabetical order, I would start with the P. Well, there's only a P in the denominator, so I don't need to worry about doing anything with that P term. I go next to the R. I do have an R in the numerator and an R in the denominator, so that will be what I divide first. R to the second has the smaller exponent. It gets completely crossed out. And 5 minus 2 is 3. S to the first, the 1 has the smaller exponent. 11 minus 1 is 10. T to the third has the smaller exponent. And 9 minus 3 is 6. So whatever is in the numerator stays in the numerator. Whatever's in the denominator stays in the denominator. The first two problems we did, there was only a 1 left in the denominator, so I didn't need to worry about it. But for problem C, I have this 2p to the first left in the denominator, and I need to keep it there. So my final answer for C would be -3 R to the third, S to the 10th, T to the 6th, over 2P. Again, now I don't need to put the 1 on the P. I don't need the exponent of 1. If you do, I'm not going to mark it wrong. And I'm going to erase that and move it. If you notice, what I did was I took that negative sign and I moved it out front. I moved it in front of the fraction. If you don't do that, if you keep the negative up with the 3, I'm not going to mark it wrong. As long as there is a negative sign in your answer, that is what I care about the most, okay? Generally, you know, you move it out front to show that the entire fraction is negative, but it doesn't matter as long as you have a negative sign somewhere. Okay, let's look at D. Once again, let me pull up the calculator. For D, my coefficients are 2 over -6. If I hit enter, again, the calculator on the iPad is going to give you a decimal, so what you want to do is change it back to a fraction. So that would be -1/3. All right, now that means when you get -1/3, that means the 1 would go in the numerator and the 3 would go in the denominator. But do we need to write the 1? No. So my suggestion would be to cross out the 2, cross out the -6. You can put a 1 up there if that makes you feel better. Sure, go for it. But I'm not going to. Instead, I'm going to put the 3 in the denominator. And since the negative is down there, I'm going to put the negative with the 3. All right? So yes, there is a 1 up here in the numerator. I just didn't write it. All right, next, look at your a terms. You've got a to the second in the numerator and a to the second in the denominator. You have the exact same thing in the numerator and the denominator. Kind of like when we had the 10 pi over pi. Those pi's would cancel one another out. That's the same thing here. A to the second and a to the second completely cancel out. In other words, there will not be an a term in our answer. Cross out b to the second, it has the smaller exponent, and 3 minus 2 is 1. All right, so now for my final answer, in the numerator, the only thing that's left is b to the first, which I don't need the 1. In the denominator, the only thing left is -3. So I'm going to move the negative out front. So negative b over 3 is my final answer. I'm going to stop the video here. I'm going to do E and F in a separate video. If you have any questions so far on example number 2, please do not hesitate to ask. Make sure you have everything written down that I have on here. If it's typed, write it down. If I wrote it, write it down. Everything that's there, please make sure you get it written down.